at Sheffield Hallam, but the points that she makes are well made, and I give her an absolute assurance that we take them incredibly seriously. She also raised, and it didn't come as a huge surprise to me that she did, the issue of furs. Now, she will remember that furs is a product of the National Security Act. Now, there are some members in this House who said that we wouldn't introduce furs at all. Then when we confirmed that we were going to introduce it, they said that we wouldn't be able to do it by the 1st of July. I gave a categorical assurance that we would introduce it by the 1st of July, and we did. We are looking closely at whether it is necessary to make further additions onto the enhanced tier, but I can say to her that no decision has yet been made specifically with regard to China. She also asked me about the embassy. This is a matter that there's been much discussion in this place, and we are moving towards a point of decision. She will understand that that is not a decision for me. It is a decision that will be made by the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, and he will do that in a quasi-judicial capacity. And as a consequence of that, I am very limited in what I can say. But I can say, as I have said previously, that national security has been the core priority throughout that particular process. She spoke about visits, and I would take a different view to the way that she characterised the visits that she described. I think it is important that members of this government, ministers, senior ministers, engage with our counterparts in China. It is only by engaging that we are provided with an opportunity to deliver tough and consistent messages. I can categorically assure her that any minister or any official that travels from this country to China will deliver a series of strong and coherent messages aligned with the messages that I've delivered to the House today. She asked also about the audit. She'll know that the previous Foreign Secretary gave a statement in this House about the China audit, but I'll look carefully at the specifics of the points that she makes. To conclude in my response to her, I hope she knows how seriously we take these matters, and I categorically assure her that I'm very, very happy to work collaboratively with her and colleagues on her side to make sure we secure the right outcome for the country.
John MacDonald.
I'd like to send my condolences to the member's family of the RFA has been lost. The RFA, the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, is unique in that it is largely civilian crewed by RMT members of the RMT trade union, working alongside Royal Naval personnel. And they work as a very professional type family. Any loss like this will be a real blow to them. Can I raise the issue of security of Chinese nationals and others in this country? 2 weeks ago, I was at a demonstration on behalf of Lee Chan-yuk, who's our colleague, the General Secretary of the Hong Kong Federation of Trade Unions, who's been and the founder of the Labour Party in Hong Kong, who's been in prison now for 4 years. And at those demonstrations, there's always a fear of the monitoring that's taking place of the demonstrators, and particularly for Chinese nationals, for their security in this country. And I'd welcome the Minister's view on what further action can be taken to reassure people that in the exercise of their democratic rights in this country, they do not become vulnerable to any actions by the Chinese state here.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman, including for his opening remarks, which I know will have been shared by the whole House. He does raise a very important point about transnational repression. The government takes these matters incredibly seriously. We have relatively recently completed a very significant piece of work through the Defending Democracy Task Force looking at the issue of transnational repression. The government is absolutely crystal clear that it is completely unacceptable for China or for any other country, for that matter, to target individuals resident in this country. I recently met with members of the Hong Kong community who raised very significant concerns about the targeting of them, and I was clear to them, as I am clear to the Right Honourable Gentleman, that none of that activity is remotely acceptable to the government, and we will do everything that we can, both to make sure that the individuals that he refers to are kept safe, and also that they feel as though they're being kept safe.
I'll come to Liberal Democrat spokesperson Lee Smart, but obviously some extra time as well allocated.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very grateful to the Minister, as I always am, for advance sight of his statement. The news that the CCP is waging a campaign to infiltrate our Parliament is deeply offensive to our sovereignty, though perhaps it's not surprising to those who have been paying attention to the recent collapsed espionage case and uncovering of interference at a UK university. Their attempts to corrupt our democracy and government must be rooted out. We therefore welcome the Counter-Political Interference and Espionage Action Plan as a first step. It's absolutely right that the government implement these measures to challenge Beijing's espionage capabilities in the UK and the transnational repression it exports to our shores. New measures to disrupt proxy organisations, new penalties for election interference and the removal of potentially compromised surveillance equipment have our full backing. However, in the face of persistent, flagrant transgressions by the CCP, this plan by itself is not sufficient. Beijing has tried to bully our government, most recently on permission for the proposed new Chinese embassy in Tower Bridge, warning of consequences if the government does not approve the plans. They have oppressed and intimidated British nationals. We cannot afford to shy away from this challenge and leave key pressing issues unresolved. I note the Minister's earlier comments, Mr. Speaker, about the Chinese mega embassy, but I wonder if I could put on record my party's repeated call to urge the government to block this plan to show that attempts to intimidate will be firmly rebuked. I further note the Minister's comments about FIRS, and I wonder if he could update the House on his current thinking about when he may plan to come back with a decision to add China to the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme. The Minister has said that the forthcoming elections bill will include measures to safeguard against covert political funding and tougher risk assessment rules for donor recipients and enhanced enforcement powers for the Electoral Commission. This is a good opportunity, Mr. Speaker. So could the Minister confirm that this will include donations via cryptocurrency and the associated transparency concerns? And can the Minister confirm that there will also be new risk assessment rules and enforcement powers for donations funnelled through third-party organisations such as think tanks?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to her for her broad welcoming of the plan. And she's raised a number of points, including several which she's consistently raised concerns about in the Chamber and with me outside of the Chamber. Let me just say to her and to other members, with regard to the embassy and with regard to any other area of policy, nobody will intimidate members of this government to do anything other than what is in our country's national interests. I do understand why certain honourable members want to refer to the embassy as a super embassy. Other descriptive terms have been used. This is a judgment that will have to be made by the Secretary of State. But I, along with other ministerial colleagues, have been crystal clear that national security is and will remain a core priority throughout this process. There have been various comments and various points made by people inside and outside of this House that are not correct with regard to the national security implications of this embassy. It's a quasi-judicial matter and I am limited in terms of what I can say, but I reiterate the assurance that I've offered previously about the importance of the national security elements underpinning any decision. She asked about the elections bill. I think she made some important and valid points. She will understand that that is a piece of legislation that sits with another government department, but they will, I'm sure, have heard the points that she have made, and even if they haven't, I will represent them to them on her behalf.
Summer Hamid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sheffield Hallam University, in my constituency, is home to internationally respected researchers, including Professor Laura Murphy, whose excellent work on forced labour in China has been met with coercion, intimidation, and attempts at interference linked to the Chinese state. At a time when universities are increasingly financially vulnerable due to a sharp decline in international student numbers, the risk of hostile states exploiting that vulnerability is growing. I welcome the closed event for Vice-Chancellors to address these concerns, Will the Minister explain whether that event will explore how it will protect academics like Professor Murphy from being silenced, and will it provide more robust support to universities who are left exposed to pressure, intimidation and undue influence?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to her. I mean, Sheffield is a great city, and she will know better than anyone that it is a city blessed by two outstanding academic universities. She knows that as the local MP, and I know that as the during the time that I spent as the regional mayor. Now, for reasons that I know that she will understand, because there remain active inquiries into this matter, I am very limited in terms of what I can say about the specifics. But what I can say to her more generally is that any attempt by any foreign state to intimidate and coerce universities to limit free speech and academic freedoms in the UK will not be tolerated. And the government has made this clear to Beijing after learning of this case. Now, the new Office for Students has issued guidance recently that makes it explicitly clear that universities should not tolerate attempts by foreign states to suppress academic freedom. I'm pleased that she welcomed the closed event with Vice-Chancellors, and of course we will make sure that both of the Vice-Chancellors from the City of Sheffield are invited to attend, and of course I'd be happy to discuss these matters further with her.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Curran.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister consider that China represents a current threat to this country? And could the Minister expand on the work that his officials are doing working with member services to remove potential security weaknesses, not just from this building, but also from MPs' constituency offices and our homes?
Minister.
I'm very grateful to the Chair of the Select Committee, as I always am. On her second point, let me come back to her, because I think it's a valid concern that she's raised, and rather than give her a response now, let me consider the facts of the case, and I'll come back to her with a more considered response. In terms of her first point, I fear that I'm going to disappoint her and maybe some other members opposite by not diverting from the policy that the government previously has confirmed in this place, and that is that the government fully recognises that China poses a series of threats to UK national security: cyber attacks, foreign interference and espionage targeting our democratic institutions, including also the transnational repression of Hong Kongers in this country. That is why we've made the announcements that we have, and that is why we will continue to do everything that we can to guard against that threat.
Alex Burskett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement, and also want to put on record my tribute to the missing crew member, those searching for him, and to all of those who keep us safe. With respect to the package of measures he's set out today, I welcome them. And it is important, of course, with the news today about the networking sites being used, whilst, of course, as has been said, this is not new. It's important to keep the risk elevated and to remind all those potentially affected of that. He knows, because we've conversed about it regularly, that I take an interest in the Defending Democracy Task Force, and so I wonder if you can say a little bit more about the series of protective security campaigns that will be coordinated through it. And can I suggest that as part of the outreach to all of the different stakeholders he's mentioned, that the task force gives thought to some sort of centralised toolkit that pulls together all of the guidance, the information, and which is evergreen and constantly being updated to ensure that all affected stakeholders in and outside of this place have it at their fingertips, so that we can keep ourselves safe from people who are a threat to us.
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful to him for his comments today, and also the points that he's made previously about the importance of the Defending Democracy Task Force. It wasn't a given that the government would necessarily continue in the way that the previous government, the previous Security Minister, had invested in the Defending Democracy Task Force. But I took the view, on good advice from my predecessor, that that was the best way, the fulcrum point, to coordinate that activity across government. And I think he was right about that. And that is why we've really invested in it as a process. That is why it is truly wired across government and law enforcement. That is why the Prime Minister recently renewed the mandate of it. And that is why I personally invest a very significant amount of time in it every single day, because I believe in the work that it is doing, and I believe it provides the right forum in order to lead this work, including the kind of work that the Honourable Member mentioned. The protective security campaigns, I think, are really important because whilst most right honourable and honourable members are sensible and diligent members of this House, we have to ensure that everybody who might be at threat or at risk has the information that they need in order to make informed decisions. And that's why on a number of fronts we will up our game and make sure all of the necessary information is provided to the people who needed it. His point about the toolkit is a really good one. I will take that away, consider it and come back to him, but I'm very grateful for his contribution.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if I may begin by saying to the Minister in his place, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to hear his statement today and to hear the areas where he's taking things forward. I particularly welcome the update on the connected devices. I merely mentioned there are a few other areas where connected devices are very real. We've spoken briefly, my honourable friend spoke from the dispatch box about vehicles, which are naturally intelligence gathering platforms on wheels when they're made in Beijing and shipped over here. And there are a whole series of other areas where we're seeing this level of threat continue and deepen. Now, he also spoke about the fact that we do need a relationship with China, and I don't disagree with him on that. But it is somewhat insulting when the Chancellor goes to Beijing and comes back with £600 million of investment over 5 years. Frankly, it's peanuts. Chinese FDI in the UK is less than 0.2%, according to the government's own figures, the trade and investment figures. And so what we need to be doing is looking at where we can compensate for that dependency. Perhaps, for example, by increasing US FDI by 1%, which would be almost double what the Chinese investment is. 1% on the US is almost double what the Chinese invest. So we need to be looking around the world at alternatives. We need to be clear-eyed about the threats, and I reiterate the point that my honourable friend made from the dispatch box. We do need to introduce China on the enhanced tier of furs.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for the points that he's made and the advice that he's offered previously. And I think the points that he makes about connected devices and about vehicles are well made, and I can give him an absolute assurance that we consider them very, very carefully. He made a point about engagement and he referenced the Chancellor's visit. I can assure him that all ministers and all officials who visit China will deliver a coherent and strong set of messages about the concerns that we have with regard to our national security. That's specifically why I referenced in my earlier remarks that the Foreign Secretary spoke specifically about these matters with her Chinese counterpart on the 6th of November. She was absolutely clear with the Foreign Minister that any activity that threatens UK national security will not be tolerated. So I give him and the House an absolute assurance that even where there are engagement activities that might on the face of it relate to other areas of government business, there will be a consistency about the messaging. He will know, though, from his time in government, that in addition to the areas of cooperation and areas where there is a requirement to engage that I listed earlier, both within departmental responsibilities that sit in the Home Office, there is merit often in engaging with China on a range of matters that aren't necessarily particularly well understood. So we do need to have that constructive engagement with the country, but it needs to be absolutely underpinned by a desire to enhance and preserve our national security, and that is the approach that I will always take with it.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, can I thank the Minister for the strength of his message about our efforts to stop transnational repression of our constituents, including the Hong Kongers and Milton Keynes, and can we continue to have a dialogue on how my constituents continue to feel unsafe in the UK. I wanted to raise an issue that goes alongside Mr. Speaker's conference, which is the online world and how we protect and defend our democracy in that online space, particularly from foreign actors, state actors, their proxies and non-state actors who use the online environment to destabilise our democracy. I would ask, would he meet with me to talk about some amendments that I'm preparing for the elections bill to ensure that we do not have these threats online and we protect them as much as we protect ourselves from the threats offline.
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful to her, and let me reiterate what I said previously about how completely unacceptable it is that any transnational repression takes place in this country, and the government will continue to stand with and support members of the Hong Kong community who've relocated here to the UK. She's right also to raise the important work done by the Speakers' Conference. And at the most recent meeting of the Defending Democracy Task Force, we looked carefully at the recommendations. There's a lot of very positive work that has been done by Mr. Speaker's Commission, and we will want to work very closely with him in order to deliver where we can on the recommendations. She's absolutely right to raise the importance of the online environment, and these are conversations that I'm having with colleagues across government, including with DCIT. In terms of the point about the meeting, she will understand that the particular piece of legislation is an MHCLG lead, but I'll make sure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister, whether that is myself or a colleague in the other department.
Clive Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In Wokingham, we have a really strong Hong Kong community. They tell me regularly how concerned they are about the growing threat of Chinese espionage and the influence in our politics. Many of them will have bounties levied on their heads. What is the Minister doing to ease the concerns of our Hong Kong community, especially my constituents, and what is he doing to protect them and to protect our institutions?
Mr. Speaker, it's an entirely fair and reasonable point, and let me give him reassurances further to what I've already said today and on other occasions. The government will continue to stand with and support members of the Hong Kong community who've relocated here to the UK. I recently met with members of that community myself, specifically to discuss their concerns. The Defending Democracy Task Force is doing a lot of work on our response to transnational repression, but if he has any further concerns, I'll be very happy to meet to discuss them further.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Does the government accept that China is a bad faith actor whose basic technique can be summed up by a single phrase, buy influence and build dependency? Isn't that exactly what's happened in our universities?
Minister.
Well, the Right Honourable Gentleman who speaks with great authority on this matter will know that I am limited in terms of the way in which I can describe the nature of the relationship, and I've given him the characterisation as I think it's appropriate. We do have to be a bit pragmatic in terms of the world that we live in. We have to do what we can to secure our national security, whilst at the same time ensuring that we are engaging in a way that is advantageous to our country and our economy. Any government, the previous one, this government, has to balance those sometimes competing interests, but this government will do it in a way that always makes sure that we safeguard our national security.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I'm great respect for the Minister himself, but I must say that listening to what he has said today, bringing forward this whole issue of the China espionage case, following on from the collapsed spy case, following on from the Christine Lee case, and the other spying that took place here in the House, doesn't he look back at this and think this is peculiar? Because we've got Hong Kongers here in the UK, now with bounties on their heads, threatened daily by China, dragged into illegal police stations. And then the Minister talked about all the other things, threats to our democracy, threats to our industries, cyber threats through IoTs, threats to our universities, and threats to our MPs who are sanctioned and who daily have to face these challenges. Doesn't that make a bit of a mockery of the idea that China is not a continuing threat and that they are not now in the upper tier of furs, as my honourable friend from the Dispatch Box called for? Surely it is time. The number one priority for a government is defence of the realm. Balancing priorities does not trump defence of the realm.
Minister.
Well, I have a lot of respect for the Right Honourable Gentleman, and he has engaged consistently on these matters for a number of years, and rightly so. What I would say to him is that we have today announced a comprehensive set of measures, but I've been clear about the willingness of the government to go further where that is required. I've also been very clear, as I have on previous occasions, about the nature of the threat and the concerns that this government has about that threat. He's right about the defence of the realm. That is the most important job of any government. But we also have to be honest about the fact that we do need to engage with China. So we need to make sure that we are engaging on our terms and on a way that is advantageous to us. I know that he has a very long-standing interest in the embassy, and he knows what my response will be with regard to that. I understand the point he's made about furs, and he will have heard the response that I've given already. I hope, despite the concerns he's expressed, that he would acknowledge that we take these matters seriously and that we're doing everything that we can to address the nature of the threat.
Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome a great deal of what the Minister has said in his statement, and I'm sure he would agree with me that just as we know China can be simultaneously national security threat and economic opportunity, China knows that too, which means that even if it were not the right thing to do in and of itself, as of course it is, standing up for our national security, because China respects strength, is unlikely to prejudice any international trading relationship we seek to pursue with it. But can I ask him one specific thing in relation to the embassy and ask for his help? He knows, and I know he respects the role of the Intelligence and Security Committee. He knows that that committee is relied upon by this House to provide judgment on those matters where intelligence is involved and the whole House cannot do so. The embassy is clearly one of those. And if the government seeks to make a decision on that before Christmas, and he may not be able to say whether that is still the case, but if it is the case, can he ensure that the ISC has before it all the material we need on which to make a judgment on behalf of the House? Because as of yet, we do not.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I often find myself in violent agreement with the Right Honourable Gentleman, because he makes good points in a very reasonable way. I mean, it isn't necessarily for me to talk about the nature of our diplomatic relationship with China, because obviously, as he will understand, that is a Foreign Office lead. But I think he is right in the way that he characterises our approach. I believe in being straight with this House and straight with the countries that we deal with. And I think he's right that it doesn't in any way disadvantage us to be straightforward and to be strong. And that's why I've very carefully chosen the language that I've used today to indicate the strength of feeling about the nature of the threat that we face. Now, I think he made an entirely reasonable point about the embassy. I won't bore him and the House with kind of further discussion about it being a quasi-judicial decision that will be made by the Secretary of State for MHCLG, although that clearly is the case. I think there is an important role for the ISC to look at the nature of the decision that is being made, and at the appropriate moment, when we're able to do so, I'll make sure that his committee is properly briefed on that issue.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the comments today by the Minister and would repeat the calls for China to be added to furs. But I have specific concerns about Edinburgh and Scotland in general. One is the continuing lack of clarity about what is to happen to Mingyang and whether, if it is to take part in the construction of the offshore wind farm in the North Sea, there will be mitigating factors put in place to stop it having on-off switches and on our energy security. We have a very large Chinese consulate in Edinburgh West, which is causing concern to my constituents because of the size of the dishes on the roof, and they're concerned about activity. And having been myself subjected to filming while speaking at a Hong Kong rally, we are concerned about the security of our Hong Kong nationals in Edinburgh. But with the Scottish elections coming up next year, can the Minister reassure me about discussions which are taking place with the devolved authorities to ensure that they are aware of the continuing and increasing threat from Chinese espionage?
Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful to her. I think she made important points about her great city. I can give her assurance that there is that engagement taking place. But I will reflect on the points that she has made and consider whether we need to do more. I know she will acknowledge that I specifically referenced the devolved assemblies in my opening remarks, but if she thinks that there is more that we could and should be doing, then I'd be very happy to have that conversation with her.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a welcome statement from the Security Minister, for whom I have high regard, and know the House does too. He will be familiar with the report produced by the ISC, of which I was a member then, remain a member now, on China, which dealt with exactly the matters he described: the widespread penetration of our universities, the theft of intellectual property, and the attempt to compromise our democratic institutions. Will he add to his list, therefore, a review of contracts with China, public sector contracts, government contracts, and so on, particularly those relating to sensitive matters? And will he finally do this simple task? As he said he was a plain-speaking man, mindful of the collapse of the recent trial, will he say from the dispatch box now that China is a threat to our national security?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to one of my predecessors, and I always listen very carefully to what he has to say, and I'm always grateful for the contributions that he makes. He knows precisely what the government's line is specifically with regard to China in terms of his final point. I think he did make a good point about the contribution of the ISC, and I hope members of that committee understand and recognise the importance that we attach to the work that they do, intending to have regular contact with the committee, including in the near future. I thought he made an entirely reasonable point about contracts. I will take that away, undertake to look at it, and come back to him privately with a response.
Dr. Andrew Murison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the package, and I welcome the Minister's commitment to continuing engagement with Beijing. But does he share my concern that you can't reason with a tiger when your head is in its mouth, and that we are rapidly approaching that position because of the stranglehold that China has over this country by virtue of our reliance on critical minerals and rare earths? And as he seeks to strengthen our position, will he ensure that we diversify our ability to gain access to those critical elements and thus ensure that China respects this country rather than sees us increasingly as weaklings, a situation that will of course deteriorate further in the event that China, God forbid, controls Taiwan?
Well, I'm grateful to him, as I always am. I'm conscious of now being joined on the Treasury bench by the Foreign Secretary, so I'll have to be extremely careful about what I say now in terms of the characterisation of the relationship. But I can say to him, and I hope this will provide some reassurance, that the government will be bringing forward a critical mineral strategy. That's led by DBT, but clearly there'll be significant input from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. I hope he understands how seriously we take these matters. I understand why he characterises the relationship in the way that he does, but I know, as a former minister himself, that he will understand that there is a degree of practical reality about how we manage that relationship. Yes, we make sure that we underpin our national security, but yes, we also have to engage in other areas. It's important we do that in a clear-eyed way, and that is how the government will proceed.
Can I encourage the remaining members and indeed the Minister short questions and short answers, please? There's an important statement to come and a very heavily subscribed debate. Chris Law.
Deputy Speaker, our devolved nations, our local authorities and our educational institutions are not adequately being made aware of the risks that China poses, as evidenced in this weekend's Sunday report by David Leask. Now, the Ministers mentioned briefings with devolved governments, guidance for candidates and a closed event with University Vice-Chancellors, but will he ensure that these are not one-off events and that there will be continuous and up-to-date flow of information from this day forward? And can I also ask for an urgent meeting with the Minister on behalf of myself and for our SNP group?
Well, I can give him the assurance that he seeks in terms of our absolute desire to work closely with the devolved administrations. That is absolutely the way in which I want to proceed. That was the response I gave to the Honourable Lady just a moment ago. And yes, of course, I'd be very happy to meet with him and his group.
Chad.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Isn't it clear that the threat from China is becoming deeper and wider and more serious? And whilst I welcome the Security Minister's statement today, is it not the case that this statement has not a single deterrent in it, as highlighted by the Shadow Security Minister on the front bench? So I just wondered, to be helpful to the Security Minister, I just wondered whether he would consider reviewing government security classifications policy, given that he mentioned the new encrypted system that he's going to introduce and fund, so that we can have a review of government papers that are classified, but also the threat to this place, and he mentioned low threshold, whether select committee confidential inquiries pre-publication are reclassified, so any leaking of those documents, as indeed leaking of government documents by civil servants, has a far higher and tougher sanction.
Well, I'm grateful to him, and I think he makes an important point about leaking, and that's something I take very seriously as the Minister responsible for the Government Security Group. I can give him an assurance, and I hope that the package of measures that we brought forward together conveys the strength of feeling and the seriousness with which we take the issues that we are dealing with. He did, as he always does, made a number of other really useful and constructive points, and rather than come back to him now, I will look carefully at them and consider them further.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is not a coincidence that just a few weeks after the collapse of the China spy case, that MI5 is now issuing this major espionage alert. China smells weakness. And with regard to the embassy, Minister, whilst you say it's the decision for another minister, the reality is this is a strategically important decision by this government on behalf of the British people. And does the Minister understand the British people will be shocked if planning consent is granted, and China will also smell weakness?
Minister.
Well, what I can say to the honourable gentleman is that this is a strong package of measures that we've announced today, but I've also been crystal clear about our determination to act further where that is necessary. I think that is the right approach. It is an approach that will mean that we are best able to guard our national security, whilst at the same time engaging with China on other areas of policy, including illegal migration.
Griffiths.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister stresses the importance of mindset. So can he tell me if it was a failure of mindset which underpins the failure to secure a prosecution of 2 alleged Chinese agents, and why parliamentarians should now trust that he has the mindset to keep us safe?
Minister.
As I said in the House yesterday, and as she will understand, I hope, and as right honourable and honourable members will understand, these were not decisions that were taken by the government. These are decisions that were taken independently by the Crown Prosecution Service, which are rightly independent of government. What the government has done today is bring forward a strong package of measures, and I hope that she and her colleagues will support them.
Tom Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I previously mentioned that the Joint Committee on Human Rights report into transnational repression specifically singled out China for the most comprehensive TNR campaign of any country within the UK. The report called for China to be on the enhanced tier of FIRS. If all those actions that the Chinese government are taking in regards to espionage, bounties on people's heads, and the clear attempts to subvert democracy don't qualify them to be on that enhanced tier, then doesn't this undermine the scheme?
Well, firstly, let me say I do very much appreciate the work of his committee, specifically with regard to the report that they published on transnational repression, and I know that he will note that we responded fully to that report. He makes the point about FIRS, and I understand why he does. He knows what the government's position is at this particular moment. I spelt it out earlier on. FIRS is an important tool, and we will carefully consider how best to use it.
John Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chinese General Sun Tzu said that the opportunity to defeat the enemy is presented by the enemy himself. Are we not presenting an opportunity for defeat when members of our military ride around in Chinese cars? And why on earth is this government facilitating secretive trade trips to Beijing for members of the Scottish Government?
Well, Sun Tzu said a number of things. And perhaps that they lend themselves to a debate all of its own. I'm not aware of the specific point that the honourable member has made, but I'm very happy to look into it if it would be helpful to him.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. According to media reports, university administrators at Sheffield Hallam told a professor of Chinese studies that she would have to abandon her research. This followed a separate defamation lawsuit against Sheffield Hallam University, as reported by the BBC. Now, I appreciate that the Minister cannot comment on the specifics of that case, but will the government do more to support universities in resisting so-called SLAPs, the strategic litigation against public participation?
Yeah. I'm grateful to him. I think it is worth me being clear about the importance that this government attaches to academic freedom. We're incredibly proud of our universities, and as a Yorkshire MP, I'm incredibly proud of Sheffield Hallam University, as I am Sheffield University. That's in part why we made the announcements that we have today, and why we will be holding what I think provides a very good opportunity to engage with Vice-Chancellors to look carefully at the nature of the challenges that they are facing and support them in responding to those challenges.
Ben Obsi-Jekti.
Speaker. The honourable gentleman knows the answer. We are looking carefully at whether other countries should be added to the enhanced tier, but we will take that decision in due course and bring it forward in the normal way. That's what the Security Minister said when I asked him for the 4th time last month why China isn't included within the enhanced tier of the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme. So for the 5th time of asking in as many months, I'm hoping the Minister will offer some clarity this time. Given the range of measures he's just announced, what would it take for the government to deem China to be a threat? And therefore, when will he assess whether China should be added to the enhanced tier?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I admire his perseverance and patience on this particular issue. Unfortunately, I'm going to disappoint him by referring him to the answer I gave previously.
Jim Allister.
Can I take the Minister back to devolved issues? In the case of Northern Ireland, international trade, quite rightly, is a reserved matter. Yet last Wednesday in Belfast, the Chinese government, no less, hosted a major investment conference in collaboration with the local Department of the Economy, with 120 Chinese companies, including Huawei, ZTE and BYT. And at the conclusion of it, signed a strategic cooperation framework agreement with InvestNI. How is that possible when international trade is a reserved matter? And will this government finally closely examine the operation of the Stormont Executive and its collaborations with China?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him. I can say to him that I was in his part of the world just a couple of weeks ago, and we take very seriously the importance of engaging with the devolved administrations. I'll look carefully at the points that he has made and reflect on them, and if he wants to discuss them further, I'd be very happy to do that.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Minister very much. I think we are greatly encouraged by the steps that the government are taking. But having chaired an APPG, one of the ones, and some of the members here close to me are all members of that, we had our website hacked, stories were replaced, and also had in conversations that we have been under surveillance by the Chinese government whilst in Northern Ireland. I'm so glad that the Minister has acknowledged this wide-scale threat. While pouring money into security is good, there is clearly a ramification to trade outcomes for those Chinese agents involved in espionage. The message today, as a consequence of the recently mishandled court case, can never be repeated. And I ask the Minister this question, that our language is set, our defences are raised, and that we're not to be trifled with by any foreign powers, certainly not by the Chinese government.
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him, as I always am, and I hope that he sees the commitment that this government has in terms of ensuring that we are best equipped to engage against the nature of the threats that we face. That's precisely why I've brought forward this package of measures. That is why I've been crystal clear about the requirement potentially to go further in certain areas. I hope he sees, but if he doesn't, let me give him an assurance, how seriously we take these matters, our desire to work with members right across the House and with the devolved administrations to do everything that we can to guard against the nature of the threat, whilst also, at the same time, making sure that we engage in a way that is in our national interest.
I thank the Security Minister for his statement this afternoon. I will allow a couple of moments for the front bench to swap over. And can all members who are leaving do so quickly and quietly, please? Which brings us to a statement on Gaza and Sudan. The Foreign Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to update the House on two of the world's gravest conflicts, in Gaza and in Sudan, following recent resolutions in the UN and discussions at the G7, and also on the action that the UK government is taking to pursue peace. Firstly, in Gaza. After 2 years of the most horrendous suffering, the ceasefire agreement led by President Trump, with the support of Qatar, Egypt and Turkey, has been in place for 6 weeks. 20 hostages are now home with their loved ones, and the remains of 25 more have been returned so their families can grieve. More aid trucks are entering Gaza, but the ceasefire is highly fragile, and there is still a long journey ahead to implement the commitments made at Sharm el-Sheikh and to get to a lasting peace. Last night, the UN Security Council passed Resolution 2803. The UK voted for this important resolution, which authorises the establishment of an international stabilisation force for Gaza, transitional arrangements, including the Board of Peace and a Palestinian committee. It underscores the essential need for humanitarian aid and reconstruction, and points the way to a path to Palestinian self-determination and statehood. Crucially, it is supported by the Palestinian Authority and Arab and Muslim partners in the region and beyond. And this resolution is a critical staging post which sustains the unity around President Trump's 20-point plan. But momentum must now be maintained. It is essential that an international stabilisation force and trained Palestinian police can be deployed quickly to support the ceasefire and to avoid a vacuum being left, which Hamas can exploit. We will also need the urgent formation of a Palestinian committee alongside the Board of Peace. And as we were clear at the UN last night, these transitional arrangements must be implemented in accordance with international law and respecting Palestinian sovereignty and self-determination. They should strengthen the unity of Gaza and the West Bank and empower Palestinian institutions to enable a reformed Palestinian Authority to resume governance in Gaza, because Palestine must be run by Palestinians. The work to implement the first phase of the ceasefire agreement must continue. That means work so that Hamas releases the bodies of the remaining 3 hostages taken in the terrorist attack on October 7th, so their families can properly grieve. And we urgently need a major increase in humanitarian aid, because aid into Gaza is still a trickle rather than a flood. In Jordan 2 weeks ago, I visited warehouses holding UK aid for Gaza, including one run by the World Food Programme, with enough wheat to feed 700,000 people for a month. Yet it still sits there because the Jordanian route into Gaza is still closed. They told me there being 30 more warehouses nearby with food, shelter kits, tents, medical supplies, less than 100 miles from Gaza, but still not getting in. Now, I welcome the very recent improvements in aid flows and that one more border crossing in Sikkim is now partially open, but it is not nearly enough. We need all of the land crossings open, including the Rafah border with Egypt, with longer and consistent hours, and urgent work is needed immediately in all parts of Gaza to rebuild basic public services and provide shelter as winter draws in. Medical staff must be allowed to enter and leave Gaza freely, and international NGOs need certainty that they can continue to operate. And I spoke to the King of Jordan and to doctors in Amman about a maternity and neonatal field hospital unit, which stands ready to be moved into Gaza. But again, they can't yet get it in. So the Israeli government can and must remove these restrictions and uncertainty now. As well as working with the US and others, we are drawing on distinct UK strength to support a lasting peace. We're providing expertise on weapons decommissioning and ceasefire monitoring based on Northern Ireland experience. We're supporting demining and unexploded ordnance, including with £4 million of new UK funding for the United Nations Mine Action Service and funding to surge in experts, including from British organisations such as the Halo Trust and the Mines Advisory Group, with impressive work I've recently seen firsthand. And on civil-military coordination, we have UK deployments into a dedicated US-led hub for Gaza stabilisation efforts. But beyond Gaza, stability in the West Bank
is essential to any sustainable peace. And I am concerned that the PA faces an economic crisis induced by Israeli restrictions that are strangling the Palestinian economy. The Netanyahu government should be extending, not threatening to end, the arrangements between Israeli and Palestinian banks, arrangements that are crucial to the everyday economy for Palestinians. It is crucial for stability, which is in Israel's interest too. And the pace of illegal settlement building continues. We have seen further appalling incidents of settler violence during the olive harvest. And while I welcome Israeli President Herzog's expression of concern, the response of the Israeli authorities is still completely insufficient practically and legally. Tackling settlement expansion and settler violence are vital to protecting a two-state solution, in line with the UK's historic decision to recognise the State of Palestine. Madam Deputy Speaker, let me turn now to Sudan, where the worst humanitarian crisis in the 21st century is still unfolding right now. The UN humanitarian chief, Tom Fletcher, who has just visited the area, has described it as the epicentre of suffering in the world, and he is right. Over 30 million people need life-saving aid. 12 million have been forced from their homes. Famine is spreading, cholera and preventable disease are rampant. And in El Fasher, following the advances by the RSF, horrifying scenes of atrocities with mass executions, starvation and the systematic use of rape as a weapon of war. Horrors so appalling that they can be seen from space. As UN OCHA have put it, El Fasher is a crime scene. There are satellite pictures showing discoloration of sand consistent with pools of blood, multiple clusters of objects consistent with piles of human bodies, and the apparent burning of bodies and operations to dispose of bodies in mass graves. Further horrors will yet unfold unless greater action is taken. A year ago, Britain tabled a resolution at the UN Security Council demanding humanitarian access and civilian protection, but it was shamefully vetoed at that time by Russia. 6 months ago, at our London Sudan conference, the UK brought together international partners and secured £800 million in funding, but the situation continues to deteriorate, including with North Kordofan now under threat and fighting moving to El Obeid. We need a complete step change in efforts to alleviate suffering and bring about peace. That means more aid to those in need, where the UK has committed over £125 million this year alone, delivering life-saving support to over 650,000 people, treating children with severe malnutrition, providing water and medicine, and supporting survivors of rape. But the challenge is still access. The RSF still refuses safe passage to aid organisations around El Fasher. The SAF is bringing in new restrictions which stand to hinder aid. Both sides must allow unhindered passage for humanitarian workers, supplies and for trapped civilians. We are urgently pressing for a 3-month humanitarian truce to open routes for life-saving supplies. But aid will not resolve a conflict willfully driven by warring parties. So we desperately need a lasting ceasefire underpinned by serious political process. At the Manama Dialogue Conference in Bahrain 2 weeks ago, I called for the same intense international efforts to address the crisis in Sudan as we have seen around Gaza. At Niagara last week, I joined our G7 partners in calling for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, the unimpeded access of humanitarian aid, and for external actors to contribute to the restoration of peace and security. We're engaging intensively with the Quad countries, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt and the United States, who have now together called for an immediate humanitarian truce and an end to external support and arms that are fuelling conflict. And I strongly support Secretary Rubio's latest comments regarding the need to end the weapons and support that the RSF is getting from outside Sudan. And last Friday, the UK called a special session of the United Nations Human Rights Council, in which a UK-drafted resolution was passed securing an international consensus for an urgent UN inquiry into alleged crimes in El Fasher, because impunity cannot be the outcome of these horrifying events. We need to make sure teams can get in to investigate these atrocities and hold the perpetrators to account. And I've instructed my officials to bring forward potential sanctions relating to human rights violations and abuses in Sudan. Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK will play its full part to ensure it is the Sudanese people, not any warring party, that determines Sudan's future. Wars that rage unresolved do not just cause untold harm to civilians, they radiate instability. They undermine the security of neighbouring states. They lead migrants to embark on dangerous journeys. So we are striving to meet those urgent humanitarian needs, striving to secure not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of lasting peace. And from Gaza to Sudan, that can only be done through international cooperation and through countries coming together for peace. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Andrew Rossendale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for advanced sight of her statement. His Majesty's opposition welcomed the passing of the US drafted resolution at the United Nations Security Council yesterday. The US has shown consistent leadership on the Middle East, and for that we are grateful. Hamas must now release the final 3 deceased hostages. We keep their loved ones and their families of all deceased hostages in the forefront of our thoughts. We cannot even begin to imagine what trauma they have endured. Madam Deputy Speaker, key to yesterday's resolution was a mandate for the International Stabilisation Force. But can the Foreign Secretary set out exactly what Britain's contribution will be to that force? The government speaks about the need for the force to be deployed quickly to avoid potential power vacuum being filled by Hamas. So, what is Britain's contribution? Are we looking at technical assistance, the sharing of expertise or intelligence, funding, action on the ground, or all of the above? It is important that the Foreign Secretary is clear and precise about these details. Can she also update the House on which countries are expected to participate and what their contributions will be? Of course, the removal of Hamas from power and its full disarmament are vital if we are to turn this ceasefire into a sustainable end to the conflict and the cycles of violence. Following yesterday's vote, what practical contribution is the UK going to make to these efforts? She will be aware that there are several points in the US President's plan specifically on this. So where does the UK dock into those initiatives? And has the Foreign Secretary identified which areas the UK will focus on as a contribution to the broader transitional day after plan? Can she at least confirm that a fundamental curriculum and educational overhaul in Gaza and indeed the West Bank will be a key focus? We have seen huge strides elsewhere in the Middle East in this domain. This must now be a moment of reckoning for the curriculums in the OPTs. It is vital that we are to build a sustainable peace. Regarding the immediate humanitarian crisis in Gaza, what practical actions is the Foreign Secretary undertaking with the government of Israel to achieve the surge in aid for innocent civilians that we all want to see? Specifically, which crossings does she believe will need attention? What is the quantum of designated British aid that is not getting over the border into Gaza? And have specific proposals and solutions been conveyed by the British side to the Israeli government counterparts on how to address the bottlenecks that we all want to see resolved? Now, turning to the situation in Sudan, Madam Deputy Speaker, in Al Fasher and elsewhere, we continue to witness atrocities, suffering and human misery beyond words, all in plain sight of a watching world. Accountability must be administered. In the immediate term, the UK should be trying to spearhead a step change in the level of pressure on the warring parties to agree a comprehensive ceasefire. As my right honourable friend, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, has argued, we need heavy new sanctions on key operators and action to deter entities, individuals and businesses whose support continues to sustain the conflict. Will this be forthcoming, and what discussions is the Foreign Secretary having with counterparts in the US, the EU, the Sudan Quad and others on this? And so can the Foreign Secretary also update the House on the government's response to the United States' efforts to bring about a humanitarian ceasefire and what role Britain is playing in that? On the dire humanitarian conditions, it was confirmed at the dispatch box earlier this month that the shifting of frontiers in the conflict is affecting aid delivery. How has the situation evolved in the last 2 weeks, and what levers can be pulled to try and smash through obstacles to aid delivery? And finally, in relation to day after planning, can the Foreign Secretary update the House on efforts to build up the capacity and capabilities of organic civilian political groups to give Sudan the best chance of moving to stable civilian government after a ceasefire? Madam Deputy Speaker, we have seen what the US has achieved through the UN Security Council on Gaza this week. I hope similar initiatives will be possible with regard to Sudan. As penholder, the UK government has a special responsibility. So finally, can the Foreign Secretary confirm her next steps on the UNSC as the conflict moves from bad to worst? We must shift gear.
Secretary. Can I thank the opposition front bench for their response on both the issues around Gaza and Sudan, to take the points that he raised in turn. In terms of the International Stabilisation Force, we do not expect the UK to contribute troops to the International Stabilisation Force, but we are already providing military and civilian deployment into the Civil and Military Coordinating Committee that is led by the US and is drawing up practical arrangements for implementing the 20-point plan. In terms of the nature of the contribution that we expect the role we expect to continue to play, we already provide some training for Palestinian police, for example, and I have met US military forces who are involved in that training, and I've met them in Jordan. Other countries are also offering to provide that training for Palestinian police, which is also going to be critical to maintaining security and safety. We've also offered expertise around decommissioning, because it is an area where, through the Northern Ireland experience, we also have experience and expertise, and particularly most immediately around demining capabilities, both in terms of funding and in terms of expertise in that area as well. He also raised the issues around curriculum reform. I completely agree with him. This needs to take place. This is a crucial part of the Palestinian Authority reforms, and I have discussed this directly with President Abbas, and the importance of maintaining the commitments that the Palestinian Authority has made to curriculum reform needs to be essential, both in terms of the occupied territories and also in Gaza, and both in terms of the West Bank, and in terms of Gaza as well. In terms of the practical issues around the opening of crossings, we want to see all of the crossings opened. We want to see restrictions lifted. Again, the coordinating committee, which has the UK presence, is working directly with the Israeli government to seek to improve access and both the monitoring and also improve the arrangements in order to get more aid through. But I do continue to urge swifter action to be able to get that desperately needed aid in place. In terms of the Sudan issue, I welcome his support for sanctions. I have had personal direct discussions with all the members of the Quad, including most recently with the Secretary of State, the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, last week, and I know how strongly he also feels about the terrible, horrendous atrocities that are taking place in Sudan now, and we will continue to offer our support to that process. In terms of aid delivery, based on what the UN and Tom Fletcher have been saying, it looks as though not only the routes, some of the routes in are currently completely inadequate, so there is both security that is needed to be provided, but also infrastructure in order to get the desperately needed scale of aid in. We will need to look at air routes in as well as the truck routes in. And then he is right as well to point to the need for the organic support for Sudanese organisations, civilian organisations. It is crucial ultimately that we have a transition to a civilian administration in Sudan, an end to the horrendous fighting that we have seen, the horrendous abuse, the horrendous sexual violence we have seen, with reports on all sides of that kinds of those sorts of atrocities taking place. And I would, I think, finally say the US leadership has been incredibly important in achieving the ceasefire agreement and the peace process so far in Gaza, but it has also depended on the international community coming in alongside the US and working together to deliver the progress so far. We need that same international commitment for Sudan, and we need the whole international community to pull together to deliver progress in the same way.
Chair of the International Development Select Committee, Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This morning, members received a private briefing on Sudan. One of the academics stated, Al-Fasher is a slaughterhouse. Our low estimate is 60,000 people have been killed there in the last 3 weeks. Madam Deputy Speaker, that would make it the biggest atrocity crime since the 1990s. These are civilians, they're not soldiers. This is not about conflict, it's about genocide. FCDO have been briefed on the likelihood of mass casualty events for years. In November 21, FCDO were publicly warned of a likely genocide. The recent ICAI report concluded that last year, officials took the least ambitious option on civilian protection. Foreign Secretary, scrutiny and diplomatic surge can slow down this slaughter. So are we leading the 25 states who joined the joint statement on the 11th of November to work together to put pressure on UAE? Why hasn't our atrocity prevention team been surged? Tawila now needs to be the focus of our protection. What are the evacuation plans to protect up to 650,000 people from genocide? Foreign Secretary, the Sudanese civilians need a champion. And as UN penholder, will that be us?
Secretary.
Can I thank my honourable friend and also the work of her committee on this issue. She is right to point out the truly horrendous nature of what is happening in Sudan now, and the horrendous, the atrocities. We've seen everything from the people being executed in the middle of a maternity hospital. We've seen the scale of the lives being lost, and also the fact that so few people are emerging out, that is deeply troubling about what more we may discover as well. And it is because that I am so deeply concerned about this that I've raised this not just at the Manama dialogue, but also at every discussion, international discussion that we have been having, foreign ministers, and also directly with all of the members of the Quad, including the UAE, the US, the Saudi and Egypt as well, because we need that urgent action. And I agree with her too that this is about also preventing further atrocities, which we are at risk of any moment if we do not have that urgent action.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and to the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of her statement, which I welcome. The Foreign Secretary is right that the scale of the humanitarian catastrophe in Sudan is horrendous, as are accounts of systematic murder, rape and torture, often targeted at civilians from specific ethnic groups, and in particular the widespread use of sexual violence towards women and girls. The UK has a special responsibility as the pen holder for Sudan at the UN. We must be relentless in pursuing true protection for civilians. So will the Foreign Secretary update the House with her assessment of the role of external actors in supporting the warring parties? Will she lead efforts at the UN to secure and implement a country-wide arms embargo? And will she set out how the UK will ensure that the UN inquiry that she referred to can gather evidence so that those actors both inside and outside Sudan who are responsible for these atrocities are held to account? Turning to the Middle East, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last night's UN Security Council resolution marks an important step forward, and I hope it will reinforce the fragile ceasefire in Gaza. Yet vital details are missing from the resolution. So can the Foreign Secretary set out what the remit and scope of the International Stabilisation Force will be, how Hamas will be disarmed, how those responsible for atrocities in Gaza will be held accountable, and how she envisages a Palestinian committee will ensure Palestinian self-determination is respected. The resolution focuses on Gaza, but we desperately need a clear roadmap to securing a two-state solution. This requires an end to illegal settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and reform of the governance of the Palestinian Authority. So will the Foreign Secretary tell the House how the UK is supporting reforms to the PA, and will she commit today to banning all UK trade with illegal settlements?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I welcome the frontbench, the Democrat frontbench response, and I agree with him on the importance of an arms embargo around Sudan and actually making sure that this is properly implemented, because it is deeply disturbing that weapons are still being supplied to the RSF despite atrocities. In fact, that there is still weapons flow for all sides as well. And that means there are issues that we need to continue to pursue in terms of the international pressure, but also on around the borders and the access and the routes as well, because I think that is immensely serious. He raised the point about the investigations. The Human Rights Council resolution that the UK drafted alongside with other partners does provide for the UN-led investigation into these atrocities, but that will come as scant comfort to anyone if we don't also have the urgently needed action to prevent further atrocities. There must be accountability, but there must also be the urgent action to prevent atrocities in the first place. And then in terms of the Gaza situation, so in the ISF, the work is underway in terms of constituting the ISF. We know that some countries are prepared to come forward and to contribute, and the mandate has now crucially been provided last night. It must operate in line with international law, and also further details will need to be developed on the way in which the new Palestinian committee needs to operate, that we want to see constituted as rapidly as possible. We also must see an end to illegal settlements. It's clear that we need to have to be able to rebuild the connections between the West Bank, Gaza and East Jerusalem, so that we can have a Palestinian state living in peace and security alongside the Israeli state. That is the only way we will get to peace for them alike.
Annalise Dodds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome her comments on Sudan in relation to potential additional sanctions and also aid access. But surely, given current nightmarish reports, we need to go far further to do what she said she is committed to, preventing further atrocities and impunity for perpetrators. So I want to ask her about some specifics on that. Will she push the Quad to pressure the RSF to do two things? First, to allow ICC forensic teams and the media into Al Fasher and other key sites. And secondly, to allow the ICRC access to detainees, given they seem to be currently subject to routine torture and mass execution.
Secretary.
I know that my right honourable friend has been raising these deep issues and concerns for some time, including having worked to deliver the London Sudan conference that took place last year. So I know that she has been championing this issue for some time. She asked a series of points about the ICC forensics teams and the ICRC. I agree with her.
Sir Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement today, but she will know that in plain sight of the international community, a slaughter of immense proportions is taking place in El Fasher. There has been clear and present warnings and evidence. This is ethnic cleansing that is far worse than anything that took place in Srebrenica, and we know it is spreading outwards, as the Foreign Secretary made clear in her statements. This is a specific UK responsibility at the United Nations. Does she agree that it is essential that she and the Prime Minister hit the phones to the African Union and senior UN countries and use our position to lobby President Trump to act? We piously intoned, in this place too, never again on solemn occasions each year. Does she agree that it is happening again, in plain sight, before our eyes, and there is no effective plan to end it?
Again, I know the honourable member has been a champion for the civilians and people in Sudan in the face of the most immense suffering for a long time. I agree with him on the points that he makes, that there is simply not yet the kind of urgent plan that we desperately need for Sudan. I think that, bluntly, the international community has failed for far too long, has turned its back for far too long. The UK has put forward the resolution that has now been agreed, fully agreed, at the Human Rights Council. When we sought to put the resolution to the Security Council a year ago on similar issues, it was vetoed by Russia. We have sought to increase aid, but the fact is, if the aid cannot get in because of the continuing conflict, then aid is simply not sufficient. We do need the same intensity that we have had around Gaza, and rightly had around securing peace in Gaza. We need that sustained intensity of effort now right across the international community for securing peace, at least starting with a humanitarian truce in Sudan. It is urgently needed, and I can assure him that this is a topic of every phone call that I am having, not just with the Quad, but more widely.
David Taylor.
Deputy Speaker, and I want to associate myself with the remarks of the chair of the Select Committee that I'm also a member of, and others who have spoken about the horrors unfolding in front of our eyes. We've heard reports that Tawila is next, and there are 650,000 people there. That includes desperate civilians. It also includes probably British citizens as well, working as aid workers. And to associate myself with the remarks that the former International Development Secretary mentioned just now, what more can we do to help protect civilians right now from harm, including, I hope, within the ceasefire negotiations that you're doing so much to try and bring about, looking seriously at some kind of peacekeeping force to protect civilians from harm?
Can I also thank my honourable friend? I know he has championed this issue for a long time, and thank him for the continuing work on the Select Committee as well. Like him, I am deeply worried about Tawila. I am deeply worried that it will be next if there is not concerted action to pull the warring parties back from the brink, to halt the RSF advances, and to at least have a humanitarian truce for long enough to get the humanitarian aid in, to get the civilians out. But frankly, we need an end to this horrendous conflict overall. And as we have seen in Gaza, it is only when there has been that huge international effort coming together that we can make progress. We need to do the same urgently now.
Richard Ford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, The Foreign Secretary announced earlier this month additional funding for Sudan. And she announced £2 million for survivors of rape and sexual violence in Sudan. But yesterday, this House debated ending the £2 billion of asylum hotels in the UK. That's what it's costing the UK taxpayer. So when might we get back to a place of spending less official development assistance in the UK and spending more of it in the region, where it would help more people in desperate need and keep them from fleeing to Europe?
Well, he will know that we have already taken steps to reduce the money and to make savings on the money that was being spent on asylum hotels. And yesterday, the Home Secretary announced further reforms to the asylum system. We clearly need to end asylum hotels altogether and not be spending the taxpayers' money on about of the devastation we will then see, but it's essential that we have the journalists in to be able to verify that. On the issue about the RSF, we have identified there's work done by the UN which identifies a range of different routes and sources of arms, but he will also know that there is a right, it's important that not just the Quad members, but other players that I think he is probably aware of as well, also need to be held to account and need to be involved in the process of ensuring arms do not get into Sudan.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for her work and for the update on Sudan and on Gaza. And I was really glad to hear her talk about the West Bank, because while we hope that a fragile peace is taking hold in Gaza, the opposite is true in the West Bank. Last month, the UN recorded 260 attacks by settlers on Palestinians, including the olive farmers, which is the highest rate of settler violence that we have seen since the UN started collecting records in 2006. The Foreign Secretary rightly said that the Israeli government's response has been completely insufficient, but what more will she do to press the Israeli government to rein in these deadly illegal attacks?
My honourable friend is right that the olive harvest is also particularly important, both economically and culturally, for the Palestinian people. And we are clear that the settler violence must end. She will know that we have introduced sanctions as a result on particular Israeli ministers, as a result of some of the things that we have seen around the West Bank. We will continue to maintain pressure on action against the settler violence and also against illegal settlements in the West Bank.
Brian Matthew.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the statement, but why is the FCDO's atrocity prevention team not working with the Sudan team? Our briefing on El Fasher this morning gave a minimum estimate of 60,000 murdered thus far by the RSF in El Fasher, with bodies being buried by bulldozer. El Obeid is likely to be the next, and Tawila camp is expected to be attacked on Christmas Day. This is the worst human atrocity since Rwanda. The Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary need to call it out for what it is, mass murder, and engage with the UAE to see it stopped and trade ended if it is not. Thank you.
Like him, I am very worried about El Obeid and also Tawila as well, and preventing further atrocities. I have discussed the issues in Sudan and the huge humanitarian risks with the UAE and also with other members of the Quad as well. It is essential that we maintain the maximum pressure through the Quad and beyond from the whole international community as well. And I know that is something that the US, who are also part of the Quad, are extremely keen to do.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I do thank the Foreign Secretary for the focus she's putting on Sudan. We certainly know from the horrific bloodshed in El Fasher that the RSF have got their sights, as we've heard, on Tawila and then onto Khartoum itself. We have got to stop those atrocities from occurring, and we know that it is being fuelled by the supply of weapons via the UAE, including Chinese drones and mercenaries which are coming through the UAE as well. Can she set out a bit more detail about the talk she's having with the UAE to stop their supply, which is fuelling this conflict?
Well, she's right that we need to ensure that the issues around the weapons, but it's also not just the weapons, it's also the pressure on the warring parties, as well as addressing issues around weapons supplies. So I have held discussions myself with all the members of the Quad, including with the UAE, also with the US, who are seeking to drive process around peace, and with Saudi and with Egypt as well. It's hugely important that all, but not just the Quad countries are involved in this, but also other countries, including neighbouring countries who have borders with Sudan, where we have seen issues around weapons being transferred, also including countries much more widely across the world as well, and that there is an international concerted effort, both around weapons, but also around the pressure on the warring parties to refrain, to abide by international law and to agree to the humanitarian truce.
Given that the next debate is very heavily subscribed, I just thought it would be helpful to members if I were to indicate I will finish this statement at about 3 o'clock. Kit Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. I'm afraid the Foreign Secretary has neatly illustrated the problem with the British government's position in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. She mentioned the very welcome return of Israeli hostages, but no mention of the Palestinian detainees who've been returned to their families. She mentioned the return of the bodies of Israelis, but no mention of the dozens of bodies of Palestinians that have been returned to their families. And can she not see that until we value both people equally and bring accountability to both peoples, we will make very little progress in this appalling situation? So specifically, to avoid accusations of illegitimacy, how will the Palestinians be represented on this board of peace? Secondly, the UN resolution puts significant conditions on the Palestinians to ensure compliance. What conditions are being put on the Israeli government to ensure their compliance in this project? And thirdly, the situation in the West Bank, as the Honourable Lady behind her has said, is not just appalling, as the Foreign Secretary said in her statement, it's the worst it's ever been. Is she going to fall in the same trap as her predecessor of being all talk and doing the bare minimum to keep our own benches from open revolt, or is she going to step forward and actually bring accountability for the daily acts of violence and terrorism that are taking place?
Well, I just point out to him, obviously, this government is the first to take the historic decision to recognise the state of Palestine. Exactly because, for too long, successive governments have supported a two-state solution and yet only recognised one state. And we believe it's the right thing to do to change that and to recognise the state of Palestine. It's why, too, we have been in continued discussion with the Palestinian Authority, who have welcomed the resolution, the UN resolution, and the peace process, and been involved in detailed discussions with the Arab states as well. He is right to talk about the detainees, those who have lost their lives, the tens of thousands of Palestinians who have lost their lives in Gaza as a result of the war over the last 2 years. It's also right that we recognise the huge damage that Hamas has done, including through their terrorist attack on October the 7th. We need to address all of the suffering that has taken place across Gaza and across the region, if we are to be able to bring people together to deliver a lasting peace. That is what I believe the current process is working to do, and is what we are working to do as part of it. This is going to be difficult and challenging ahead. It is going to be complicated, but we need to continue to do so.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given the reports of thousands of civilians being prevented from fleeing El Fasher by the RSF and allied militias, what urgent steps is the government taking to ensure the safe humanitarian corridors are in place to support unimpeded access for aid agencies? It was a particular issue we heard this morning in the private briefing. And just on international backers, what more can we do to ensure that we're holding them to account, particularly the UAE, but across the region as well? Thanks.
Well, the UN Human Rights Council resolution that the UK drew up and that was passed on Friday does include the urgent need for humanitarian access, as well as the investigation of the atrocities and the ability to hold people to account. I think the other important issue is that the Quad, that includes the US but also the UAE and Saudi and Egypt, has now committed to the humanitarian truce, to a ceasefire, and also to ending to external support to warring parties. It's essential now that we all work to implement the commitment that the Quad has set out and ensure that there is huge international pressure to get that peace in place.
Brendan O'Hara.
Madam Deputy Speaker, this morning, as chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on International Law, Justice and Accountability, I hosted the briefing for parliamentarians on the crisis in Sudan, at which Nathaniel Raymond of the Humanitarian Search Lab at Yale described El Fasher as being a slaughterhouse where 60,000 people have been murdered in just 3 weeks. Those same Yale scholars now forecast that by Christmas, the RSF will be in Tawila, where hundreds of thousands of civilians could face a similarly appalling fate. But what has been missing, everybody agreed at the meeting, has been the Prime Minister's personal leadership on this issue. So will she encourage the Prime Minister to become personally involved and show that vitally important international leadership that could prevent Taweelah becoming another slaughterhouse?
So not only am I worried about Taweelah, I am also worried that the full scale of the atrocities in El Fasher may yet prove to be worse even than has been reported and commented on so far. So I am deeply, deeply worried about that. In terms of the Prime Minister's engagement with this, what I would say to him is that when I was appointed to this role, and also previously in the months before that, the Prime Minister had highlighted personally the importance of Sudan as being one of the central areas that we needed the UK government and the FCDO to focus on because of the scale of the atrocities, including the work to lead the London Sudan conference in April of this year. Before many people were raising concerns about Sudan, this government has been consistently highlighting the humanitarian risks. But the reality is that the situation is still getting worse, and we need that international support for action.
Please, can I encourage members to ask short questions and short answers, please? Foreign Secretary Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for her very strong and principled leadership about conflict resolution. On the International Stabilisation Force, I wonder if she can update us. She'll be very aware of the heavy rains and flooding that we've now seen in Gaza. She's absolutely right about the importance of getting food in, but there are reports that the Israelis are blocking mobile homes and tents. So can she say some more about what we're doing when they say that a dry night is a luxury? And just on this point about war crimes and investigation of war crimes, clearly the future of Gaza is also about a truth and reconciliation process. Will the ICF play any role in that, please?
So the first issue on the need for shelter, and this is particularly becoming acute as we move towards winter. And we know that some of the warehouses, for example, that I saw in Jordan have in them the winter supplies, including the tents, including shelter. And of course, there's going to be a much bigger reconstruction effort needed to properly restore homes for Palestinians across Gaza. We are continuing to urge the lifting of restrictions around some of the restrictions that are preventing the tents and equipment going in, and will continue to do so. And this is an issue that the CMCC, the Coordinating Committee, is also raising. She is right to raise issues around accountability, but she will also, I'm sure, agree that the most immediate issue is to ensure that the peace is in place, and the immediate task of the International Stabilisation Force will be to sustain and monitor peace in Gaza so that the IDF can withdraw from Gaza.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I very much welcome the Foreign Secretary's proactive statement, and I hope that will be the pattern of engagement with Parliament going forward. In addition to the horrendous atrocities that she and others have detailed, the World Food Programme have identified that 700,000 people face catastrophic hunger conditions in the coming months in Sudan. So we really do need that step change, but we need some evidence of it. So can she be clear that the exchanges with the UAE have been robust and that there are real efforts to engage the African Union?
So the honourable member is right to talk about the extreme hunger, the famine that is taking place. In fact, I've seen worse figures suggesting there are 8 million people at risk of famine in Sudan. That is the equivalent of the population of London. It's that many people who are at risk with serious food risks, and that is why he is right to talk about the issues in terms of the RSF and humanitarian access. I would just also say, though, that the SAF has also been restricting access for humanitarian aid and trying to introduce greater restrictions as well. So we need all sides to understand the vital importance for all of those civilians across Sudan of them being able to get basic food.
Martin Rhodes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome that the Foreign Secretary made reference to the West Bank in a statement, and others have made reference to the highest levels of attacks by settlers on Palestinians in the area. Will the government now consider taking the step that other European countries are taking of banning all trade with illegal settlements?
Well, he will know that my predecessor had already taken steps to prevent, to halt the free trade discussions that were underway, and also to introduce sanctions for particular Israeli ministers who, as a result of some of the things that were happening in the West Bank. We need to ensure that as part of the peace process that is underway for Gaza now, it does include a broader strategy for the West Bank. We want to see that happen as part of this peace process, as part of the work of the Board of Peace, and that is where we'll be pursuing action.
Leila Moran. Mr. Speaker, I'm really struck by the number of my constituents who, unprompted, will raise how weak international law seems to be at being able to hold those accountable, both in Gaza and also in Sudan and elsewhere, to account for the atrocities that they commit. This is a moment where we must bolster international law, not undermine it. So my question to this Foreign Secretary is, what has happened to the UK response to the ICJ advisory opinion on the occupation? She herself in her statement pointed out the stranglehold on banks, the Palestinian economy is on its knees, and the illegal settlements continue to grow. This is not new. This has been happening for decades. What are we doing about it? We must abide by that opinion, don't we?
Well, she will know that is the advisory position from the ICJ. We take immensely seriously, and we will always look at any issues around international law, including advisory positions as well. And I think the greatest progress that we can make in terms of upholding international law right now is to ensure that this peace process for Gaza and also more broadly for the West Bank remains on track, that we can have a process towards a two-state solution. And we did make clear as part of our representations at the UN last night that all of this needs to be implemented in line with international law.
Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Foreign Secretary spoke in her statement of Israeli restrictions strangling the Palestinian economy. These are not restrictions, they are the strategic attempts to undermine the viability of Palestine by illegal settlement, harassment, intimidation, murder and displacement of Palestinians from their land. Illegal settlements are still being fuelled by UK funds through trade in illegal goods and services that are produced there. This is completely unacceptable. So can I call on the Foreign Secretary to introduce a full ban on trade in goods from illegal settlements in the West Bank, and further sanctions, extending the sanctions already introduced on organisations such as the Israel Land Fund to halt the flow of resources that are making this illegal activity possible?
Well, she's right to raise concern about the scale of the illegal settlements and also the way in which they have been expanding, but also the settler violence and, I would add to that, the withholding of funds to the Palestinian Authority that are also desperately needed. As I've said, we have already introduced the additional sanctions and also the restriction of the free trade agreement process. What we also need to do critically now, just as progress is being made on Gaza, is ensure that we have a broader process to include the plans for the West Bank and also for a two-state solution. We have continually raised this as part of the discussions and will continue to do so. It is important that the UN resolution does provide very clearly for that journey towards Palestinian statehood, for it to have the support of so many countries now, including the US, for that process is really important.
Mark Pritchard.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I also welcome the passing of UN Resolution 2803? The Foreign Secretary mentions a two-state solution. Given the current Prime Minister of Israel doesn't seem particularly keen on a two-state solution, is that not a problem going forward for a permanent and lasting peace in the region? And on Sudan, isn't it the case that Russia are deliberately destabilizing Sudan? They have a self-interest through the Wagner or so-called Africa Corps group in Sudan, seeking to mine out gold and to take out oil. So what action can the British government take against those who are supplying the supply chain, getting those minerals out?
First, on the issue around the position of the Israeli government, we clearly strongly disagree with the Israeli Prime Minister on this. But I would just also say Israel has signed up to President Trump's 20-point plan. And it is important that the 20-point plan is implemented, which includes recognition of the importance of Palestinian statehood as well. And on the wider issue, we had the most evident, overt nature of it with Russia vetoing the UK resolution on Sudan 12 months ago. And did that openly in the UN. He will know our continuing concern about Russia's engagement in a whole series of conflicts.
Paul.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the leading role the UK has played at the United Nations, both in trying to corral international action on the slaughter and the sexual violence in Sudan, but also on the international leadership we've shown in recognising the state of Palestine, an historic recognition, as she's acknowledged. But can I thank her also for her personal commitment and her personal action in getting sick and injured Palestinian children to British hospitals? And can I ask her, can she tell us what more the UK can do, given the NHS expertise, in rebuilding healthcare in Gaza itself?
I strongly welcome my honourable friend's point. I went in Jordan to meet some of the doctors and the hospital that was helping with the transfer of the Medivac patients from Gaza through Jordan and here to the UK, to thank them for their support. We will continue to provide that support for the sick and injured children. And also we are working now on ways in which we can work with other neighbouring countries on how best to support the rebuilding of healthcare in Gaza. It's urgently needed, and it is an area where we have considerable expertise.
Shawkat Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement, and I agree wholeheartedly regarding to Sudan. Both sides must allow unhindered passage of humanitarian supply. However, I do not share her confidence in a US-led plan simply because the US is directly responsible and participant in war crimes and genocide happening in Gaza. They supplied over 10,000 tons of weapons. We have over 69,000 Palestinians killed. Does the Minister agree that this is nothing more than the imposition of an illegal occupation through coercive methods? And if this plan is adopted in its present form, it will be a mockery of the entire international legal system, and the United Nations will be acting in direct contradiction to the fundamental tenets of international law.
So let me just say to the honourable member, it's because of the US-led plan, widely supported, including by Qatar and Turkey and Egypt in the mediations, that we have a ceasefire in Gaza after 2 years of the most horrendous suffering. And President Trump's leadership, and they're determined to take this forward, is immensely important. I would also say that the UN resolution passed last night had the support of and has been welcomed by the Palestinian Authority, as well as by neighbouring Arab and Muslim states as well. That is important to maintain that unity. We will not get progress if we don't. It's important ultimately that we can deliver the two-state solution that this government is committed to, but we need everyone to work together to deliver that.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
My constituent was separated from her 5-year-old son during the horrors of displacement in Sudan. By sheer miracle, he made it to Saudi Arabia and is now staying there temporarily until the 1st of December, after which time he'll be forced to return to Sudan. What can the Foreign Secretary do to support families like this by way of evacuation pathways or humanitarian schemes?
We'll happily look into the particular case for her constituent that she raises, but there is just an urgent need to get the humanitarian aid in, but also to get safety for those who are facing the most horrendous circumstances at the moment. She's also right, in a situation like this with such terrible conflict, families get separated and needs that support in order to be able to reunite.
Ben Lake.
Can I echo the Foreign Secretary's horror at the slaughter in Al-Fasher, and I share her concern that further atrocities will take place unless the international community can secure decisive intervention. With that in mind, can I ask the Foreign Secretary what response has there been to Friday's resolution from the warring parties, and how does the government, in conjunction with its international partners, intend to apply pressure upon them, not only to comply with the resolution but also international law?
I would say to him bluntly that the response from the warring parties has been wholly inadequate, and both sides are still refusing to deliver the ceasefire that we urgently need, even a humanitarian truce to let aid get in. There have been talk, there has been words put forward, but it is still completely inadequate given the scale of the humanitarian the crisis that we face, and we will need continued pressure on all warring parties to act.
Mohammed Yassin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Foreign Secretary for the increased aid to Sudan and for confirming that no UK military equipment is known to have entered the conflict. As UN penholder on Sudan, what early discussions has the UK government had with the ICJ to ensure that those responsible for war crimes, especially against children and women, include the use of rape as a weapon of war, are brought to justice?
Well, I welcome the points that he's made, both about aid and also the restrictions on weapons as well. The approach that we have been taking, we earlier this year secured the renewal of the UN fact-finding mission, because the first stage is to ensure that there is evidence, and then most recently the Human Rights Council resolution on enabling a full UN investigation into those atrocities. It's crucial that we have those investigations so that the international courts can then hold people to account.
Ellie Chams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary, what further concrete steps will she take to increase pressure on Israel to allow humanitarian access for the 30-plus humanitarian NGOs that have been blocked from delivering urgently needed relief, and pressure to stop Israel supporting settlement expansion and settler violence? And on Gaza, likewise, what new concrete actions will the government take to press those who are supporting the warring parties to stop the slaughter? And specifically, how will she persuade the UAE to put more pressure on the RSF to stop the slaughter?
So, just firstly, in terms of the steps for Israel and the allowing in the aid agencies, this is something that we have raised directly with the Israeli government, but also are raising directly through the CMCC, the coordinating committee, as part of the peace process. Because bear in mind, humanitarian aid and the flooding of Gaza with humanitarian aid was a crucial part of the 20-point plan and the ceasefire agreement that the Israeli government as well as Hamas have signed up to. So we need to ensure the implementation of that, as well as have direct pressure. And of course, we continue to raise the issues around the settlements as well. And then in terms of Sudan, again, we are continuing to engage with all of the nations that can have any possible influence on the warring parties in order to seek the peace we desperately need.
Sarah Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I welcome the news of the UN Security Resolution that was passed last night, the establishment of the International Stabilisation Force, and the arrangements that will follow for the Board of Peace and Palestinian Committee. But with a record 260 Israeli settler attacks on the West Bank taking place in October alone, can I ask the Foreign Secretary, does she agree with me that failure by Israel to punish such attacks is inconsistent with international law? And what further steps will she take to put pressure on Netanyahu and his government to stop these attacks?
I welcome the points my honourable friend made, because look, we obviously have the deep concerns about illegal settlements. They are illegal and should not be taking place, but also about this escalation of settler violence and the need for strong Israeli law enforcement action against the settler violence, as well as withdrawing from this approach to settlements as well.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I ask the Foreign Secretary in future not to link two statements together in one, so we can actually seriously examine one subject? And is she satisfied that the British arms and equipment sales that go to the United Arab Emirates don't end up in the hands of the RSF and don't end up as being part of the ghastly conflict in Sudan, which is fundamentally about people trying to grab the mineral resources of that country? And will she also assure us that There are no more British arms being sold to Israel. There is no more security sharing with Israel while it continues the illegal activities and the killings and the destruction, even since the ceasefire, so-called, of 1,500 buildings in Gaza, until such time as there is a real ceasefire and real peace.
Well, I'd say to the honourable member, I think look, he is right to highlight the importance of both Sudan and Gaza, and I felt it urgent to be able to bring both forward so that the House could have the update and to be able to respond. In terms of the he will know that we have a very strong restrictions in terms of arms sales. However, I also take this issue immensely seriously, and when there were some allegations that were raised about 3 pieces of equipment, including a seat belt, an engine part and a shooting target in Sudan, I have sought to ensure that thousands of licences that the UK has were reviewed, and in each of those cases there was no evidence of any of the parts that were identified or allegations made being covered by any UK licences, and I will continue to ensure if there are ever any concerns or allegations raised that there will be reviews of those licences in those circumstances, because it's immensely important that those restrictions are maintained. And I would also say to him, we are continuing with the restrictions on arms sales to Israel that my predecessor, the Deputy Prime Minister, has set out.
Mary Kelly-Foy.
Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Foreign Secretary for her statement and her ongoing efforts to pursue peace. The rebuilding of Gaza must be Palestinian-led. Civil society and communities in Gaza have led the efforts on the front line in the face of 2 years of genocide and decades of Israeli siege, occupation and military violence. They are the ones, they are the leaders, the expert and the only ones who can determine their future. Does the Foreign Secretary accept that any initiative which bypasses Palestinians in Gaza in favour of externally imposed initiatives will always fail?
Well, we continue to take the view that Palestine must be led by Palestinians. It's immensely important. It's why it's important that the Palestinian Authority has supported and welcomed the resolution that was passed by the UN, that the resolution does provide for the transfer of Gaza to the Palestinian Authority alongside the West Bank. And we have also pressed for the Palestinian Committee to be set up as swiftly as possible as part of the transition arrangements, so that, again, that Palestinian voice and expertise is heard.
Final question, Sammy Wilson.
Speaker, and can I draw the House's attention to the entry in the Register of Interests? The Foreign Secretary is right. The peace is fragile in Gaza. Despite the fact that the Israeli government has agreed the 20-point peace plan, has agreed the UN resolution, and despite what she has said, has allowed over 20,000 truckloads of aid into Gaza since the ceasefire, while at the same time Hamas have refused to accept the UN resolution, continue to terrorise individuals in the Gaza territory, stockpile weapons and have refused to give up their own weapons. What can she do to ensure that Israel is encouraged in its path towards peace and Hamas is discouraged in its resolution to continue the conflict?
Well, the honourable member rightly says that we have a 20-point plan. Both the Israeli government and Hamas signed up to it. It includes the decommissioning of weapons, something that the UK feels strongly about. It includes ensuring that Hamas does not play a role in the future governance of Gaza or of Palestine. And it includes the Israeli government ensuring that there is humanitarian aid is properly restored to Gaza, and also that the IDF can withdraw fully from Gaza as well. This is an ambitious 20-point plan. We know that, of course, there will be difficulties in implementing it, but we also know how incredibly important it is. And it is only through international community coming together, but also through the Israeli government and Hamas respecting the commitments that they have signed up to, that we will make progress and we will keep the desperately needed peace for Palestinians and Israelis alike.
Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for her statement this afternoon? Point of order, Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Whilst I'm sure the whole House is grateful for the Foreign Secretary coming here today and making this important statement, there does seem a pattern where the government are combining two very, very important subjects, as outlined by the Right Honourable Member for Islington North. These issues of a real concern to all of our constituents across the House, and I think they are worthy and they merit individual statements by the Foreign Secretary or somebody else on the Treasury bench. I seek your guidance, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his point of order and for having given advance notice of it. He will, of course, be aware that the combination of statements is not a matter for the Chair. That is, the government determines statements, but I'm sure that the Foreign Secretary has heard his comments this afternoon. Point of order, Alicia Cairns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Scrutiny in this House requires timely and meaningful engagement by ministers with shadow front benches. Disappointingly, as Shadow Safeguarding Minister, responses from the member for Birmingham Yardley have been woeful. An average of 48 days per letter written to them. At worst, the longest response was 97 days. When I was chaired the Foreign Affairs Committee, my own government responded within 10 days to all letters received. So can I ask what advice you can kindly give on how we get responses as front benches in a dutifully and timely manner?
I thank the honourable member for her point of order. Members should receive timely responses to their correspondence with ministers, and it is disappointing to hear she has experienced such a significant delay. Ministers themselves are responsible for the timeliness of their response, and I hope the Treasury bench will have heard her concerns and pass them on to the relevant department. Honourable members may also wish to raise their concerns with the Leader of the House at business questions every Thursday. Point of order, Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I seek your advice. I currently have a number of written questions which are overdue for a response from DEFRA ministers. In total, these amount to 15 written questions, 14 of which were due by the end of October, and one response which was due on the 5th of November. 6 of my 15 questions were tabled as named day questions. As written questions are one of the ways in which members can hold the government to account, and with perhaps as many as 100,000 civil servants based in London, I would ask if you have any advice on what members can do when replies from departments are not forthcoming.
Can I thank the honourable member for his point of order, and he is right to say that written questions are an important way in which members may hold the government to account. As he will have heard me say earlier, ministers themselves are responsible for the timeliness of their responses, but I hope the Treasury bench have heard his concerns and will pass them on to the relevant department. I think in this case, DEFRA. Both the Leader of the House and the Procedure Committee may also take an interest in these matters, and so the honourable member may wish to raise his concerns with them. Point of order, Helen Maguire.
On a point of order, Madam Deputy Speaker, during my remarks last week I stated the Queen Elizabeth Foundation for Disabled People had entered administration when this process hasn't begun yet. I also noted the loss of 48 NHS beds when these beds belong to the charity and are occupied by patients referred to them by the NHS. I apologise for any confusion, and may I take this opportunity to once again share my disappointment that the Queen Elizabeth Foundation for Disabled People will be closing after 90 years of delivering its vital service.
Can I thank the honourable lady for advance notice of her point of order? She has corrected the record, as she did this time last week.